Surf's up, guys. It's Mauisnake, and we're on CS2 for IEM Sydney. I'm going to be going through the outright odds for all of the teams that are participating at IEM Sydney. And for a quick recap, outright odds are made by Pinnacle, who this video is made in partnership with. And these numbers are, if you bet a single dollar on one of these teams, you will be paid out this number times however much you bet. So if you put a dollar on Vertex to win the whole tournament, and they somehow actually win the whole tournament, they won't. You would win $651.70. All right, so moving through this, we're going to be going through the teams that we think are least likely to win the tournament via Pinnacle's rankings, and we're going to be going all the way up to the team that is most likely to win the tournament according to their odds. So first up is Vertex. They were able to make it through the qualifier of this event. For the Oceanic region, they were able to beat LF Org, but all in all, they don't really have any notable results on the international stage, which is why the odds are so ridiculous for them, and I would recommend not putting your money on them. Greyhound are up next. You can see that they actually have significantly better odds. That being said, still not very likely to be winning this one, and they were the local hero invite for IEM Sydney, and all in all, Greyhound, I feel like I've seen this team do slightly better here and there in terms of just taking down a team once in a while. They beat Orcs at ESL Pro League, which were not really a team that were too noteworthy, but they still even dropped a map to them. So yeah, Greyhound pretty deserving of having no real chance of winning this tournament. Then we've got LinVision, and I'm glad that the odds are getting significantly better for LinVision. We were able to see them beat 9, actually, at ESL Pro League, and they weren't really able to accomplish too much else other than that. But they're a team that, in some ways, I actually feel like they could be good in a while. I think that the Chinese scene itself is starting to show a little bit of life with Tyloo signing the Cyclone lineup, with the fact that obviously Tyloo now have a bench lineup, which might come into action at some point under a new organization. And then teams like LinVision as well seem to actually be helping out this scene in terms of just the competitiveness. And I don't really think that there's any reason to worry about them too much this early on. But I imagine that actually in a year or two that the Asian scene could win a couple more upsets. I'm not going to say that they're going to actually win any tournaments anytime soon, but it wouldn't surprise me in 2 years if an Asian team makes it to, say, like top 8 at a Katowice or Cologne. Like, I'm not going to actually even put them in the playoffs, which would be top 6, but if they're like one BO3 away, I feel like that's totally possible. Next up is Apex, who have 58x odds. They had an interesting run at ESL Pro League where they actually lost out to 9Z in the lower bracket semifinal, and they lost out to Fnatic. They were able to pick up wins over M80 and Imperial, but they were actually a team that was able to get here through the European qualifier, where they were able to beat out BetBoom and Nine. So those teams aren't too bad, all things considered, but I just think that Apex has surprisingly underwhelmed, despite the fact that many of us, including myself, looked at Apex losing JL and after the Paris Major and thought, okay, surely Tatsunito would probably be decent enough that it's not going to hurt them too much, because I thought that they were winning via structure as opposed to JL just popping off. But it turns out that actually really set them back, or you could just say that maybe they had a bit of a fluky run with some of the strats that they were calling. And for a team that seems incredibly heavy on anti-stratting, it does seem like maybe a big tournament where you can slow the matches down a little bit, given that, say, for example, their first matchup is against Navi, there's a chance that they really do anti-strat them, but with it being on CS2, I feel like the likelihood and possibilities for anti-stratting are a little bit lower. So next up, Fnatic, the team that I was just talking about, beat Apex to qualify for playoffs of ESL Pro League. I'm just not too happy with the state that Fnatic is in right now. I will say that Afro has been pretty nice for this roster. He seems to take a good amount of initiative for the team, but I've really never rated Dexter's IGLing too highly. And for a guy that came into the tier 1 space with MOUZ and did actually some pretty decent work during the online era, having won, I think it was Flashpoint 3 that they ended up winning, or no, Flashpoint 2. It seemed like, actually, no, it was Flashpoint 3. It seemed like there was some hope for Dexter maybe to do well, but it's just that the style of calling that he had always been implementing was so default heavy and based off of making a really good mid-round read. You could maybe imagine a world where Fnatic and Dexter really elevate themselves if everybody were just somehow 15% better as a player, but that's asking more than really is possible in a tier 1 environment where most people come into the space and who they are is very much so already molded. So Yeah, I think that this team with Fnatic, I almost feel like I actually think they've regressed since they've picked up Dexter and they've actually taken Mezzi off of the in-game leader role. After they were able to beat Apex and qualify for the playoffs of ESL Pro League, they actually lost to Monty in the first round of the playoffs. Although Monty did go on a really nice run, making it to the semifinals, this just to me is still a Fnatic team that actually they're just simply worse than they were last year, and that's even with having an Opper who is probably better in Afro. I just think that the calling is actually worse now. And Dexter himself as an in-game as a player on top of being an in-game leader, he was the 10th worst rated player at ESL Pro League. And I'm not going to go on a campaign just yet to call for Dexter's head like I did someone like Nafany, but I think it's pretty much the most obvious choice if you really want to improve this roster is that you would probably remove Dexter, put Mezzi back on the in-game leading role, and then just get an aggressive rifler on top of that. I even, like, what's hilarious is I actually could see a person like Nafany fitting pretty well as the aggressive rifler, but just don't let him call, because the way that Mezzi was calling on Fnatic was better last year to me. Okay, Gamer Legion, 37x odds. I do not understand these odds, whatever. Gamer Legion to me is pretty bad. I think that this team is gonna, I think that they can win. I don't even think, okay, they're not going to win their first matchup against FaZe, almost sure, like almost certainly. And I don't know why the odds are even this good for them at all. Gamer Legion, when they played at ESL Pro League, they were able to beat Greyhound. And then they actually, they lost to Movistar Riders, they lost to Astralis, and they barely beat an IP team, and then they lost to Furia, who everybody knows is also doing pretty badly right now. I don't know why these odds are this good. I almost would put a team like, if I had to just take a random guess, I guess it's just that 37x odds is not good by any metric whatsoever. So yeah, sure. I would just say that practically speaking, every team that is beneath this next one, you should not put money on. Like, I don't know. Maybe you know something about their CS2 practice habits, but I just don't see any world for it. Because the next team is very interesting. It's BetBoom. BetBoom, led by Nafany, has a chance now on LAN to prove themselves, because this is the first tournament of significance that they've played on LAN together. This is Nafany, this is Chiron, Siren, Zorte, and Danis. And they have Innershine as their coach right now. And right now, the way that this team is actually playing does not look exactly like Cloud9 did when they were led by Nafany. Which leads me to another point, which is that I actually think that now I do think that Nafany was not the right in-game leader for Cloud9. He clearly had a lot of difficulties with making sure that he was able to just get everybody in order and on the same page and be a good leader in big-time moments. And so I was okay. I'm still okay with the fact that they swapped it out for Electronic, now actually Hobbit on the in-game leading role. But I actually now have to say that it was more or less... It's almost obvious now this was Groove's system that led Nafany to call in the style that I detested. And so in some ways, I do think that Nafany got a little bit of the short end of the stick, because it's really been Groove's system that has failed Cloud9 so spectacularly in big pressure moments. And Nafany, I actually, in some ways, kind of just hope the best for him. I actually legitimately hope the best for Nafany now, because I do think that in some ways what he was working with trying to balance Shiro's input, Hobbit's input, Groove's style of calling, and put that together in a live round situation had to be very difficult. And so if he's able to find success with BetBoom, I would feel like that would be, I don't know if it's deserved is the right word, but I actually think that BetBoom is a team that I wouldn't mind just seeing kind of punch up here and there and try to take down some opponents. Like, I wish they had a matchup that weren't Vitality for the first round, as we can see right over here that they're playing Vitality in the first round. If it were, say, a team like Apex or Vertex, Gamer Legion, maybe even FaZe, I actually think there's upset potential. But when it's Vitality, that team is probably the most favored to win this whole event in my eyes. Complexity, next up. 24x odds for Complexity, actually significantly better than BetBoom, and I would say that this is probably off the back of the run that they showed at ESL Pro League, which wasn't spectacular by any means, but they were able to finish in the round of 12, and the way that they were able to accomplish that was by beating Cloud9, and then actually almost beating G2. They were up 15-10 with a map already, and they could have actually taken G2 down and made it into the round of the quarterfinals immediately. I don't know if it would have actually resulted in them doing any better in the tournament, because they still lost to Monty, and had they have actually won that game versus G2, they would have played MOUZ, and I don't think they're going to beat MOUZ. But I actually think there's a case for Complexity to be, say, a top 12 team in the world right now. And so for them to be on 24x odds, it kind of feels like a sneaky pick. But I will say one thing that really dissuades me from actually going in on Complexity. Not that I'm advising anybody to bet at this point, but it's just that they played the showdown, the America's Showdown for Blast. And because of that, they had less time to practice CS2. And so going into this event, I do think that they're going to be a little bit behind because they just probably had less time to work with the new game. Next is Monty, who now you get a pretty nice jump in the odds there. You get 14x odds for Monty here. You're going to see that based off of, that's practically speaking, just based off of the semifinals run they were able to accomplish. I feel like the wins against Fnatic and Complexity were okay, but then the fact that they 2-0'd Vitality, to me, kind of felt like they caught Vitality in a really weird point where they beat Vitality on Anubis and on Nuke. And I do think that when I watched that game, I do remember that Monty played really well. And I think that if you probably took their Anubis, you would think that they're one of the better teams. But then they kind of got smoked against Navi on it in the next matchup. And I didn't really think that Navi was supposed to be better than Vitality at ESL Pro League. So for Monty to lose to Navi after beating Vitality feels like it could have been just a really nice run of form for some of the individuals on that team. Because I do think that Monty is probably... Actually, I think Monty is a top 10 team in the world. I think that's actually... I feel like I'm pretty confident in saying that, actually. But a couple individuals during ESL Pro League, to me, overperformed and over-delivered. Demka, for one, is a guy that I'm going to keep my eye on because I'm not really sure right now if I really believe that his ESL Pro League performance is where I would actually stack him up in terms of just who he is as a player in the world. Because at ESL Pro League, he had a 1.14 rating, but it was actually with just a 1.06 KD. And I think that rating sometimes can get really weird where people will look at that number and be like, you know, that was really sick. Like, he was finding a lot of openers, but with just barely scraping above a 1.00 KD, it's not like the rating necessarily, to me, reflects that exact... It doesn't really reflect that perfectly. And I would say that Monty in some ways do look like a different team after having lost Boros, but I don't necessarily think that they're a team that I'm going to count on to go deep into tournaments consistently. Thing is, their first matchup here is against Complexity. I think it's very winnable. Then their next matchup is against G2, and I guess it's possible. I actually think it's possible that they beat G2, but I just, for winning a whole tournament, I do think that they're a little bit away from that. I just don't... Just the way that this lineup is composed to me with Bro still stepping in, and Bro's fine, but Bro and Krasnal to me are both just kind of decent. They're like decent extremity players who will every now and then just find a weird multi-frag, and in an anchor spot, I think that they both can kind of shine here and there. Mostly Bro there, but like, I don't really see this team when I look at them for rifle talent and think that they're actually total world beaters just yet. And maybe they're going to actually prove me wrong here, especially given the fact that it's moving to CS2 and anything is literally possible. But I think that they're still a ways away. And now moving forward, I think we're going to get into some of the teams that actually have a realistic possibility of winning the event. Next up is FaZe. I would actually say this is a mega gamble, and it's really always about with FaZe, are they even motivated? Do they even care? Twist gave 1,000 excuses after they lost at ESL Pro League, and I don't really think that for a team like FaZe, they should be okay with that. Like, FaZe for that matter, like, they lost to MOUZ in the round of 12, and it was very, very convincing. That being said, MOUZ did end up being the champions of ESL Pro League, so, you know, it's not the end of the world if you lose to the team that ends up being the number one winners. But for FaZe, the average age on the team dissuades me a little bit from believing in them, and so I wouldn't really jump on FaZe or this opportunity here. I would be more willing to jump on the next team, and that is Navi with 8.75 odds. Navi, to me, has shown marked improvement from when the lineup began. I would say that the chemistry between the players has significantly improved. Late round breakdowns in situations, they seem to be playing off of each other much better. I'll say that also Ema, who was to me the problem of this team from the get-go, has now shored up some of the losing conditions where before he he could frequently die on extremities and in positions where you just really can't afford to lose a player. And now sometimes when he gets pressured, he'll be willing to take the fight, and he actually can win the fight very frequently. So Navi is a team to me that they still have a lot of reasons to even improve more, because some of these people are still probably not entirely comfortable with everything that's being called around them. And so I think that Navi is kind of like a cool sleeper pick on an event like this. Their first matchup is Apex. Their second matchup will be MOUZ. I don't have any faith in Vertex beating MOUZ. And so I don't know if they're going to, beating MOUZ is going to be a little bit difficult for me, but if there's any team that can do it, I mean, Navi did just play MOUZ in a best of 5 grand finals, and both of these teams are going to have significant time to improve, look back at mistakes, because they didn't have to play in the showdown. Well, MOUZ probably would have wanted to play in the showdown, but they didn't. And so for Navi, I just think that they're kind of in a position right now where there's still more to expect from this team. And that's why you can be hopeful with a game change that maybe they're the team that can get a 5% boost, and some of the other teams might get a little bit of a loss. And on top of that, they are still in a period where they know that it's not, I wouldn't say it's a honeymoon, but it's a period where you know you're not capped out yet. You haven't hit your ceiling. Cloud9, next team here with 8.29 odds. Very similar odds to Navi. They did not necessarily have the best time at ESL Pro League. In fact, it was pretty bad for them, all things considered. They lost to Complexity, they lost to Liquid, and then they lost to Eternal Fire. And they lost to an Eternal Fire team that they had already beaten earlier at ESL Pro League. That being said, they did win the European Showdown, and because of that, there's a couple ways you can take that. Winning the European Showdown, it says, okay, your individual form is good. And the teams that Cloud9 actually ended up beating included Movistar Riders, G2, and Big. None of those teams are slouches given Movistar's recent run of form and the fact that Big, to get to that position themselves, had to take down 9 and ENCE. And they didn't even drop a map to ENCE or 9. So Cloud9, they could be good with Hobbit leading. I think a lot of people have their hesitations about this. I'm actually willing to say already that the team looks significantly better with Hobbit leading. It almost feels like Hobbit just knows how to call the style that Groove wanted before. I will say I don't think the style still is going to be one that'll serve them the best in late tournament moments where it puts a lot of stress and pressure on individuals to kind of just mechanically overperform. But I will say that they do look like they're not as disjointed, because sometimes at ESO Pro League, what was really disappointing about them was they were just doing some of the fundamentals of Counter-Strike very badly, including trading, spacing, just getting nades down at the right times. Like it was just almost like, for some reason with electronic calling for this team and Perfecto in 2, it almost looked like you were watching two teams come together that didn't even speak the same language before, despite the fact that they're all obviously speaking Russian. So they're a team that also, in a weird way, like Navi, have a lot of potential to improve off of what they have shown already. So kind of an interesting pick. Could be. They always feel like the dark horse. They always feel like there's potential there, but I'm not. I would have a little, I don't know. Like, actually, you know what? I might do it. I would maybe do it for Cloud9. Just, I can always convince myself with this team just because there is so much raw skill there. And if they are improving off of what they did at the Showdown, then they're actually a really good team. They're actually a tier 1, potentially an A tier team. So here we go. Last couple teams. And this is practically speaking all based off of recent form. But MOUZ are at 6.4x odds. And I do want to say, this team is the youngest by far. Their average age is 20 years flat. Actually, BetBoom might be pretty young. I haven't looked up their age necessarily. But for MOUZ in tier 1 teams, they are the youngest. And it's not really even close. So MOUZ have a lot of potential to have 5 guys that are all grinding their asses off, because, and I know some people are like, oh, but you know, age really isn't a limiting factor. It's all about motivation. Yes, but it's easier to gain motivation and or hold motivation when you're younger. When you look at some of these other teams, like say like a FaZe team, you know, Kerrigan and Rain are gonna have to deal with their wives. You know, like they're gonna have to they're gonna have to do so much else outside of the server that's gonna take their focus away. Whereas everybody on MOUZ is practically speaking a child, and so they're all just gonna get to full focus on the new game. They are not gonna have to worry about anything. They're gonna just get Deliveroo and, you know, Uber Eats and stuff like that. None of the, also delivery sponsors, please hit me up. Okay, like I could use one, but no, they're gonna they're gonna use just all of this kind of untapped potential where basically everybody is still in a fledgling state of their career where they're all just kind of kicking it off, but they're super young, so they don't have the worldly responsibilities that a lot of the older people do. And for me, that's a reason to believe that maybe MOUZ don't win this one, but there's a lot of reasons to think that this team can continue improving at a very, very steady rate. And so for me, actually, the bolder prediction here isn't that MOUZ is going to win this event. It's just that MOUZ is going to be a top 3 team for the first 6 months of CS2. The individual form plus their age, to me, combines to give me a very strong case to believe in this team moving forward. Next up is ENCE. They're actually I'm pretty sure they're the oldest team of everybody here. And so that being said, it's the first tournament, and it is just based off of the motivation you're bringing into this. But ENCE played the showdown. They were playing the showdown. They were playing against Big on CSGO a week ago. And so to come into this tournament with jet lag and having less practice probably means that they're not going to be in the same form of some of the teams that were able to focus more. And the same thing is going to bite G2, which at 5.05 odds, they also had less time to really worry about this tournament. They just lost to Cloud9 also a week ago. And so that's really going to be to their detriment. And so for me, the number one team here is as Pinnacle has laid out, is Vitality. My camera even zoomed in even more as I say this, but no, this is Vitality are in such a strong position right now because they didn't have to play the showdown. They were actually already practicing CS2. They talked about the fact that they were practicing CS2. And so in some ways, they weren't even really worried as much about ESL Pro League as they were about IEM Sydney. And so for me, that's a great reason to believe that Vitality is likely to take this event. And I think I've talked about kind of like where I would spread my units and bets for this kind of stuff before. And I would probably for this, I would give like a half unit to Vitality. I'd probably give a half unit to MOUZ if you really wanted to think about those kind of things. Or if you really want to spread it even wider, a wider net, you could do like quarter unit Vitality, quarter unit MOUZ, and you could do quarter unit on a flyer like Cloud9. And at that point, if any of those hit, you would actually end up coming out on top because 3.7x odds on a quarter unit and you're only using 3/4 of a unit means that you would 3.7x a quarter unit bet. And yeah, so yeah, you can do the math. Okay, whatever. Again, guys, I don't bet, but I just have ways that where I would go about doing this stuff before, and I think it's probably worth considering. So either way, that's going to be it for the preview of this one of IEM Sydney. I will be doing some co-streams for this as well. It's not going to be the same because ESL was very interesting with who they gave co-streaming rights out to. And so, but you'll see. I'm going to be streaming in this upcoming week. So be sure to tune in, guys. I'll be watching I'll be watching as much of this as I can because this is CS2, baby. And we're back. Even though the game is in a very scuffed state, it's going to be kind of a fun tournament. And hopefully, at the very least, the Australian crowd will make things fun too. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. Thanks to Pinnacle for sponsoring and partnering with me on this video. And as always, being toxic is a choice.